I'd love to know a bit more about how Everledger uses blockchain. All of my reading and understanding of what Everledger is doing is pretty spectacular and had some pretty high-tech systems involved there. And if you can unpack, just for the layman, let's say, including myself, let's put me in that category, of how does blockchain get utilized in that situation? Where's the value derived from it? What other technologies tie in? And are you guys using IoT stuff at all, or are you using special sensors or anything? Unpack it a little bit if you don't mind.
So I guess, being probably one of the first companies that used blockchain for non-financial use cases, it was a really interesting time because I saw so many entrepreneurs look at Bitcoin, start to think about where Ethereum could play a role, run directly into, say, financial services or fintech as we knew it back then. Now it's DeFi. So
Flavor of the
from
month.
my perspective, it was interesting because I looked at an industry that was hyper consolidated in the power structures, so the corporates that were involved in the major mining, extractive industries, or even those that were certification and laboratories. And then also saw that there was hyper consolidation geographically. So 80% of the world's diamonds are cut and polished in one regional location in the world, in Surat, which is about 3-4 hours outside of Mumbai. And I thought to myself, it's a really interesting time, given that in the mid-90s, I'd always worked in some form of track and trace technology. And I hold some patents in the discipline of RFID, so radio frequency identification, attenuation systems, and that's that smart tagging that we sort of know today, that of course now has hybrided out in various different other forms. But so when I saw blockchain, I thought, wow, look, this technology could be deployed in so many ways, but there are two problems to be solved when trying to deploy blockchain environments. And one is, how do you enable an environment where consensus in the human formation was somewhat aligned, but how do you bring the digital tooling in alignment to that consensus formation? And we were fortunate enough in the diamond industry in 2003 that the United Nations created the Kimberley process, which is a 3-step validation system, and it drives across 81 countries in the world. So they have spent the best part of the last 15 years working out how they can all agree to agree or all agree to disagree. So there was already a sense of consensus ruling. But the industry at large was driven by literally a gentleman's handshake, a chit of paper, and a promise to pay, like a whole bunch of IOU widgets and gadgets that were running around industry. So when I look at the diamond industry, there were propositions and problems that were really at the forefront of why Everledger began, and also why we chose diamonds to begin with. So firstly, we can't solve on blockchain alone anything to do with provenance and traceability. It has to bring together a symphony of technologies, whether it be the object identity itself. And from a diamond perspective, we were yet again so fortunate because diamonds are unique by their very nature. They have a puff, which is a physical unclonable feature. That's not something that I've turned. In fact, a puff has been around for quite some time. The semiconductor industry used it for generations. So when we looked at diamonds, we thought, wow, we can get the unique identity of that diamond, and we can capture it digitally. How do we not just only capture it digitally, but we don't want it to be the sole validation point of the person to say this is the diamond? How do we get cross-validation across an industry? So Everledger, I guess, has moved from a point where we can capture the identity of diamond, create that digital twin, and enable each of the validation points across the industry to either contribute data or use data in such a way that provides for transparency and de-risks the supply chain. So winding on now, I guess we have a pretty prominent footprint globally in the diamond industry, and we've been able to prove that blockchain provides value, and value in various different ways. One way is the consumers want to know where the diamonds come from. So we can identify the origin of the stone. And if there's a trusted story along that pathway, consumers are willing to pay more. And we know that. In certain markets in the world, they will. And so we became a bit of a zero-sum game in terms of the cost, because the paper systems that were in place were archaic. There were heaps of issues around validation and fraud.
Mm.
And there was no way to really purpose up the story of the diamond. And we know that the industry or the consumers are willing to pay between sort of 8 to 10% of the value of the item itself. So it's a good value proposition that we've managed to put together. The second part, of course, is then to look into the next positioning. It was one of the first customers that we brought onto the system, which was the Singapore Diamond Investment Exchange.
Nice.
Now, when we think about the future of the world, there's lots of futures, you know, the future of green. But there's no futures for diamonds. There's no ETFs. There's no market for that. But when we think about investments within diamonds, diamonds themselves have outperformed silver and platinum and gold, these typical investment vehicles. So we know that the work that we began a number of years ago in not just only starting with the identity of the diamond, enabling that item to be registered and also that item to have some fractional ownership so that it can become investable. Therefore, it brings liquidity back into the market that is typically dried up.